Contrary to what many believe, the prophets declare Jerusalem will be almost completely destroyed, and it'll be that destruction that ushers in the end times. This is Off the Cuff, and I'm Steve from TorahFamily.org. Let's talk about it. I know many hold to the thought that the modern state of Israel is virtually invincible. But all one has to do is read biblical history, and you'll see Israel was defeated multiple times over and over. Why? Because of their disobedience to God, Yahweh. And while many believe the return of the sacrificial system will be a return to the Torah and put them in good standing with Yahweh, it won't. It'll be the modern state of Israel's sacrificial system that Yahweh declares an abomination. I don't have time to go over that again, so please see our teaching, The Abomination of Desolation, to understand what's coming and the deception it'll bring. There's a growing sentiment among believers that holds to the thought that Israel can do no wrong and Yahweh has their back. But I'm here to tell you, the prophets say otherwise. The prophets declare utter devastation is coming their way. I'm not here to say I have all the answers, but I'm here to tell you there's a lot of wrong beliefs being spread about, and they're only going to assist in the end-time deception. Like believing the times and a half a time from Daniel is 3.5 years, though Daniel 12 specifically narrows it down to 3.5 Moedim, meaning 3.5 holy days. 3.5 appointed times. But here's the thing. Daniel is given much regarding the end times. But what I believe is missed by most is how the 70 weeks are what brings it all to a close. They wrap everything up. So it seems the timing of the end times being cut short should consist within those 70 weeks. We know many opinions abound regarding the 70 weeks of Daniel. But instead of dividing on the topic, maybe we should consider how they could all be right and overlay in perfect harmony. That being said, I believe we need to seriously consider how the 70-week prophecy of Daniel is talking about 70 literal weeks. I sincerely believe, especially when it comes to prophecy, many things will have various layers of interpretation to them, all giving different answers that point to something big, and all being right at the same time, showing there are multiple ways for the weeks in Daniel to be understood and all be correct. That being said, I sincerely believe the 70 weeks of Daniel can be just that, 70 literal weeks, 70 literal 7-day weeks. In previous teachings, I've shown our understanding of the 70 weeks, Shavua in the Hebrew, could actually represent 70 Shavuots, 70 Feast of Weeks, which I still believe is a plausible perspective. But think about it. Shavuot is the Feast of Weeks. Why is it called Feast of Weeks? Because it's a time where we are to literally count weeks. So, again, I believe the 70 weeks given to Daniel are ultimately just that, 70 literal weeks, 490 days. Now, I've seen all the other views, and they're very interesting. I like them. At the same time, they may not be the ultimate fulfillment Yahweh is pointing us to. I know many are probably saying, Steve, it can't mean literal weeks. That's insane. Trust me, I get the pushback. I already went through it myself. But we also have to remember, Yeshua said everything was going to be cut short. I have several theories on how things are cut short, as mentioned by Yeshua, noted in these teachings and linked below. You'll see how several of these theories harmonize together with this teaching. Now, look at Daniel 9:24 with me. Notice the Hebrew word for what the English renders as sevens. This is the word that's debated here. Now, look at how the time frame that this word references continues to be referred to by Daniel in the following verses by other forms of this word, but all of them pointing back to the first form of the word in verse 24. The original word from verse 24 is referenced twice in verse 25, once in verse 26, and twice in verse 27. It's referenced by these variations of the same word. That being said, take notice of this word in verse 25, referencing the original from verse 24. Now, let's move forward, ironically, 7 verses. We find this exact same word for sevens from Daniel 9:25, vowel point for vowel point, is only used again here in Daniel chapter 10. Verse 2 says, "At that time I, Daniel, mourned for 3 weeks. I ate no choice food, no meat or wine touched my lips, and I used no lotions at all until the 3 weeks were over." So, why do we say this very same word has to mean weeks of years in previous verses? If that's true, then Daniel fasted 21 years here in chapter 10. But we know this 3 weeks in Daniel 10 was only 21 days because of what's given to us here in verses 12 and 13. So, here's a word used in chapter 9 for sevens that literally means weeks, 21 days, just 7 verses later. Do we just ignore this? No. For too long, we've all been guilty of trying to make these verses fit our own end-time paradigm, instead of just letting the verses speak for themselves. 70 weeks to bring everything to an end. A literal 70 weeks to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. The next verse shows these 70 weeks start with a declaration for the rebuilding of Jerusalem. So, if these 70 weeks are what starts the end times, then this verse implies Jerusalem could go through some kind of devastation first. I'm talking before the end times even begin. In fact, this would be what ushers in the end times. So, when you see the modern state of Israel go to war with its neighboring countries, you know there is a good reason to be on the watch for Jerusalem getting hit hard. If this happens, that's when we need to watch for the declaration that kicks off the 70 weeks. The declaration to rebuild and restore Jerusalem. After that, be on the watch for the sacrificial system to start back up. Now, you know I always look for patterns, and when I see one that fits a certain year, I realize how it could also fit in other years just the same. The question is, what year would it actually be fulfilled if it was a pattern to be considered? I always lean to the thought that Yahweh waits till the absolute last minute to bring judgment. Over and over in the scriptures, we see how he's merciful in sending judgment right away. Seen here in Exodus 34:6, Numbers 14:18, Nehemiah 9:17, Psalms 86:15, and Joel 2:13. This is seen in the 40-day warning through Jonah as well. That being said, we know the last days has a specific time already set in place. It's not going to change. This is seen here in Revelation chapter 9, verse 15. This will happen sometime within the tribulation. Some see it as the actual Battle of Armageddon, and that's possible. Whatever it represents, though, we see it's on a specific hour of a day, of a month, of a year, and it's locked in place. It's not changing. And according to Daniel, there are exactly 70 weeks to bring everything to an end. That means exactly 70 weeks are determined and established, just like with this day we see in Revelation 9:15. So it seems this day will fit somewhere within those 70 weeks. There's reason to believe the Battle of Armageddon could start on the Day of Atonement and continue to the last day of the 69th week, the day right before the Feast of Sukkot. thus making the 70th week of Daniel be the very week of Sukkot. Now you're probably wondering, why would it be at the end of the 69th week and not at the end of the 70th week? Because the 70th week, the week of Sukkot, will be the 7 days used to purify the altar for the millennium. Remember, the description for the 70 weeks conclude with anointing the most holy. Where else do we see the exact Hebrew words of most holy? Right here. Exodus 29:37. For 7 days make atonement for the altar and consecrate it. Then the altar will be most holy, and whatever touches it will be holy. So, the 7 days of Sukkot will be for the altar. Then everything is ready for the last great day, the 8th day, thus concluding the 70 weeks, and all is anew on the last great day. This would explain why we see the focus on the other 69 weeks for everything else. Even seeing how Yeshua comes to Jerusalem at the end of those 69 weeks to clean house. Remember, Yeshua has blood on him when he comes to Jerusalem. This is because he just fought at the Battle of Armageddon, and now he's come to Jerusalem to clean house and start everything anew. Thus, the last week is for the dedication of the altar. Now, if this is so, then that would mean you can simply count back 70 weeks from a future last day of Sukkot, and you'll find when the 70 weeks of Daniel are to begin. However, the start of these 70 weeks will not be the start of the tribulation. As I've noted before, the tribulation is the actual time when the Antichrist rules with Babylon out of the way. But there will be a time before he reigns where Babylon gets drunk on the blood of the saints, seen here in Revelation 17. Now, we need to know and understand there will be a time of intense, fierce persecution come upon the body of Messiah. It will be this time when Babylon gets drunk on the blood of the saints. As noted before, though we believe the resurrection takes place before the tribulation, the resurrection takes place at the earthquake in the 6th seal. This shows all who are in the first resurrection will still go through the time of the first 5 seals. Let me say that again. This shows all who are in the first resurrection will still go through the time of the first 5 seals. Again, we see the woman, Babylon, is drunk on the blood of the saints before she's destroyed by the Antichrist, seen here in Revelation 17:15 through 18. Thus, believers will indeed be persecuted and even killed for their faith. Though the Antichrist will obviously be on the scene and ruling in some capacity, this persecution will be before he rises to his final position. This is a time before the tribulation. The tribulation is the time of the Antichrist's rule. In fact, the destruction of Babylon is what ushers in his final rule. I know there are some who would consider this a mid-tribulation resurrection. However, that view generally holds that the first half is good, but I personally wouldn't call persecution and martyrdom good. As discussed in our teaching, The Prayer of Escape, Yeshua encourages his followers to pray they escape everything that is coming. That includes this time before the tribulation. This time of martyrdom under Babylon will be the time of the 5th seal, where we see the martyred souls under the altar. It's under the time of Babylon's rule. Thus, Babylon getting drunk on the blood of the saints. The resurrection comes later at the 6th seal with the great earthquake, most likely taking place on Shavuot, Pentecost. Those who miss the first resurrection will have to endure the tribulation under the Antichrist. If they survive, they'll be the ones who partake in the second Exodus at the end of the tribulation. This is detailed in our teaching, the second Exodus. Now, what I'm about to show you is a pattern that doesn't happen every year, but it has happened before. As many of you know, the calendar we follow has exactly 1,290 days from the first day of the year to the last day of Sukkot, 3.5 years later. This happens every year, even in the years with the added months. That unchanging pattern alone reveals what I'm about to show you for this year can happen again. So, as always, the question is, what year would it be for everything to happen in accordance to prophecy? And for that, we simply continue to watch and pray every year. As I've noted in other teachings, the tribulation is cut short by having a delayed start, not by starting on time and having the end cut off. No, it's shortened by having a delayed start. That being said, watch how this year shows us a pattern to be on the watch for, knowing every last day of Sukkot is the conclusion of a 1,290-day count. When counting 70 weeks back from the last day of Sukkot, we find many of the dates given to us through the prophets come to life. Watch how things fall into place this year. 70 weeks back from the last day of Sukkot of 2026 lands exactly on the 5th day of the 4th month this year. Sounds meaningless, right? Until we consider what's given to us in the prophets. It was this day when Ezekiel saw a wind storm coming. So, on this day in the past, Ezekiel saw a storm on the horizon. This is the storm of Yahweh, as seen in multiple references in Scripture. Jeremiah 23:19, Jeremiah 25:32, Jeremiah 30:23, and even seen here in Proverbs chapter 1, a time of repercussion coming on all those who didn't choose to fear Yahweh. So, the storm is seen by Ezekiel off in the distance on the 5th day of the 4th month. More than likely, it's pointing to what begins on the 9th day of the 4th month. That's the fast of the 4th month. It's when the walls were broke through on Jerusalem at the Babylonian invasion. As I've discussed in our teachings, watch and pray and watching for that day, the 9th day of the 4th month is one of the fast days that gets turned into a joyful moed, a joyful holy day, as seen here in Zechariah 8:19. This is prophesied to happen, and it hasn't happened yet. Now, what exactly could happen to turn such a day of mourning into a joyful holy day? To me, it would need to be something big. I'm talking turn the tide of history big. More than likely, something to do with the Ark of the Covenant. But again, everything starts with the 5th day of the month, starting a complete 70 weeks to the last day of Sukkot next year, with the 70th week of Daniel being the week of Sukkot. Now, if this is the pattern to watch, according to Daniel, a decree has to go out at the start of those 70 weeks, which also implies a need for Jerusalem to be rebuilt. So, a decree, or devar in the Hebrew, which simply means word, comes out at the beginning of the first week of the 70 weeks. And, as seen in other years, this year it lands on the 5th day of the 4th month. Then, just days later, we see the prophesied day of the 9th day of the same month. Now, here's the interesting part. As noted in our teaching, as in the days of Noah, I show how the seals are literally broken on the 27th day of the 2nd month. However, though the seals are broken on that day, we know there's a delay to when those events actually take place according to Revelation chapter 10, verses 1 through 6. So, how long is this delay? Well, it just so happens that 40 days after the 27th day of the 2nd month, the day the seals are broken, we land on the 9th day of the 4th month, pointing to a 40-day delay for the seals to begin. I have to confess, I've always kind of chuckled to myself when hearing others talk about 40-day delays for the end times. But now that I'm seeing it as a potential here, I'm wondering if it could be legitimate. When the delay is over, I believe the seals could all progress rather quickly, leading up to the fifth seal, where we see persecution come on believers. A time where we see martyrs are to wait for their blood being avenged until the full number of the martyrs is completed. So, will the delay conclude 40 days after the 27th day of the second month, on the fast of the fourth month? If so, it seems we could have a warning on the fifth day of the month, just like Ezekiel had regarding the vision of seeing the coming storm. That warning will be the start of the 70 weeks given to Daniel, the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. What could be a reason to put forth such a decree? My current mindset is one of two things. Either Jerusalem gets bombed in such a way that there's a massive amount of devastation to the Temple Mount. Thus, a decree goes out to rebuild it. This is very possible. Or the Ark of the Covenant comes out, and suddenly there's a movement to restore not only the Temple Mount, but all of Jerusalem to its former glory when the temple was up. Whenever and however that desire to rebuild starts to become a reality, you'll see Jerusalem getting surrounded. This is especially true when you see the sacrificial system begin again. Now, could it be something else? Absolutely. These are just my current thoughts. But when the ark comes out, and one day it will, it'll be found with the original tabernacle and all that goes with it. They'll set the ark and the tabernacle up first, and then begin their efforts in building a stone temple. The next biblical day from the prophets to watch will be the 10th day of the 5th month. The temple was destroyed by Babylon on this day. That's why it's the fast of the 5th month. Now many reference the 9th day of the 5th month, that being the 9th of Av. But this is because of the destruction that came from Rome happened on the 9th. Now, could the future event take place on the 9th instead of the 10th? Of course, but I tend to lean to the 10th. But whichever of the 2 days it will be, for some reason it becomes a day of rejoicing for Judah in the future. Now I can easily see this being a day dealing with either the Ark of the Covenant or the tabernacle being set up or something with the Temple Mount. Now, after that, the next biblical day to watch would be the first day of the 6th month. We see Haggai told to go to the people on the first day of the 6th month regarding the condition of the temple, implying it's time to fix it up. Now, looking at the book of Ezekiel, 4 days later, what do we see? On the 5th day of the 6th month, Ezekiel sees the idol of jealousy. Now, if you haven't seen our teaching, what is the idol of jealousy? You need to. You need to. It ties so much together. But again, Ezekiel sees this on the 5th day of the 6th month. So what's the significance? Well, this year, there is exactly 430 days from the 5th day of the 6th month to the last day of Sukkot next year. Why is this significant? Because in Ezekiel chapter 4, Ezekiel is told a period of exactly 430 days of judgment is coming. 40 days on Judah, and then 390 days on Ephraim. On this day, the 5th day of the 6th month, the siege on Jerusalem comes to an end, and the invasion on Jerusalem begins. Did you get that? I said, on the 5th day of the 6th month, the siege on Jerusalem comes to an end, and the invasion on Jerusalem begins. 40 days on Judah, and then 390 on Ephraim, the northern kingdom. We see that 40 days of judgment on Judah starts in Jerusalem in Ezekiel 9, a time of utter devastation on Jerusalem. The timing is given in chapter 8 and remains that same day in chapter 9. This time of judgment that will be coming on Judah, seen in Ezekiel, will be at the hands of the Assyrian. as it's prophesied. It will be a time of utter devastation. It will start with Jerusalem being surrounded. Now, that surrounding will most likely be the result from either the 9th day of the 4th month or the 10th day of the 5th month. It will be under siege from that time on, with the invasion starting on the 5th day of the 6th month. Please see our teaching titled The Assyrian. Now, ironically, those 40 days of judgment on Judah comes to a perfect end on the day right before the week of Sukkot this year. Thus, Sukkot will truly be a time of rejoicing, as the scriptures say. But not only does the 40 days of judgment on Judah end just in time for Sukkot, it goes in line with the third of the 4 fasts, the fast of the 7th month, that's turned into a joyful moed. Now, this is not talking about the Day of Atonement. No. The fast of the 7th month is known as the fast of Gedaliah. The day of this fast has moved over the centuries. It's been traditionally observed from the 3rd day of the 7th month through the 24th day of the 7th month. But how appropriate will it be for them to lock a day in on the day they overcome the invasion that brings absolute, utter devastation and turn a day of mourning into rejoicing? But after the end of those 40 days of judgment on Judah begins the 390 days on the northern kingdom of Israel. This is why Ezekiel 5 says, "A fire will spread from there," meaning Jerusalem, "to the whole house of Israel." Now, while I'm sure things will have already begun to get bad for the northern kingdom before this time of Sukkot, martyrdom will most likely begin from this time on, especially for those living in Babylon and the Babylonian system. This will most likely come from the Noahide laws being put in place as law around the world, with anti-Semitic laws being made and enforced in honor of what happened to the modern state of Israel, yet survived. If you haven't already, I encourage you to see our teaching, Beware of the Noahide laws. So, the first 5 seals could begin on a 40-day delay, starting in the 4th month and continuing to Shavuot next year. The 6th seal kicks off with the earthquake from the resurrection on Shavuot. The resurrection on Shavuot will be when Babylon gets destroyed by the Antichrist and the 10 rulers. Then the Antichrist rules with Babylon out of the way. This happens right after he begins his 6-month rule, starting around the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Understanding why his rule is only 6 months is explained in our teaching, Declaring the End from the Beginning. But his rule takes full effect when he destroys Babylon with fire. Again, this will be the same day as the great earthquake and the resurrection on Shavuot. His rule will come to an end at the Battle of Armageddon, when Yeshua takes over to clean house in Jerusalem. Exactly how everything will play out is yet to be seen. But I believe the perspective of interpreting the 70 weeks of Daniel as literal weeks sincerely needs to be considered by all who study prophecy. And regardless of one's view on when the resurrection takes place, please know a time of intense persecution is coming before the tribulation ever begins. You must be ready to escape it or endure it. In conclusion, I'm sure there are many who have questions as to how Daniel 9:24 through 27 could be fulfilled by way of literal weeks in regards to all that's said in these verses. So, I want to give a few closing thoughts regarding some of those verses. First, where it says, Anointed One, in verse 26, the Hebrew doesn't say one. It just says anointed. Thus, the anointed will be cut off. This is referring to the people of Yahweh, His anointed. In fact, that's what Daniel 12:7 shows. It's when the people have been broken. This is covered in detail in our teaching titled The 1-Year Tribulation and the Return of Yeshua. Also, in verse 26, it says the people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. This is the time when Yeshua comes to Jerusalem with his army after the Battle of Armageddon. Thus, the blood that's already on him. This is referencing the Joel 2 army coming with Yeshua, the day Yeshua comes to clean house in Jerusalem. This is discussed in our teachings, Satan's Greatest Masquerade, Part 1 and 2. Also, in verse 27, where it says he strengthens a covenant, the English says 4:17, but the Hebrew doesn't say for. It simply implies the covenant is strengthened in the last week. In fact, the next sentence elaborates on it. It shows how in the midst of the last week, he brings the sacrifices to an end. And that's what Yeshua does. He brings the sacrificial system under the false prophet and Antichrist to an end because Isaiah 66 tells us the sacrifices under the Antichrist are an abomination to Yahweh. Then, later, in that same chapter of Isaiah 66, Yeshua sends out messengers to bring back all the survivors. This is covered in our teaching, the Second Exodus. But in this, he strengthens the covenant made with Abraham to bring his descendants back to the land. That covenant with Abraham is detailed in our teaching, the eternal covenant. The bottom line in all of this is that there's reason to believe Jerusalem may undergo a time of destruction to usher in the 70 weeks of Daniel. Thus, the decree to rebuild it. But that'll be just the beginning. It doesn't truly get bad until after Jerusalem gets surrounded and the invasion takes place. After that destruction, the rest of the house of Israel all over the world will undergo a time of intense persecution, even to the point of martyrdom. As noted, the pattern in this teaching has happened before on our calendar, so it can happen again if nothing comes of it this year. May we always have our eyes open and hearts in tune to His. Well, that's all I have. Think about it. Pray about it. But more than anything, be a doer of the word and not a hearer only. Until next time, Shalom.